What if I told you that the most feared man in professional wrestling isn't a wrestler at all? That Paul Heyman, the genius manager who shaped WWE's greatest superstars, was actually forced into cruelty by an industry that demanded it. That the conflicts, the betrayals, the broken promises, they weren't character flaws. They were survival mechanisms. Everyone knows Paul Heyman as the manipulator, the betrayer, the man who turned friendships into stepping stones. But what if the real story isn't about a monster who emerged from wrestling? It's about an industry that created one. Stick around, because we're about to expose the 10 conflicts that defined his career. But here's the twist. We're not just judging him. We're explaining how the wrestling business forced his hand at every turn. And by the end, you might see Paul Heyman completely differently. Paul Heyman didn't start out as a manipulator. He started out as a fan, a kid in Philadelphia who fell in love with professional wrestling. But he fell in love with the story, not the spectacle. He understood something that most people didn't. Wrestling works best when it felt real. In the early 1990s, when Paul Heyman was hired by Duck W. Bill Watts's Duck W, he was young, eager, full of ideas about how to revolutionize the business. But Duck W in 1991 was already in trouble. It was trying to compete with WWE and losing. The formula was stale. The product was predictable. Heyman saw the problem immediately. Wrestling needed to evolve. It needed edgier storytelling. It needed psychology that went beyond big muscles and catchphrases. But nobody wanted to listen to a young upstart telling them how to run a company. Drop a comment if you remember watching Duck W in the 90s. Did you notice the product was losing steam? Because Heyman sure did. Here's the thing about Paul Heyman that people miss. He wasn't ambitious because he wanted to destroy people. He was ambitious because he believed wrestling could be better. He had a vision. And when the industry rejected him, when Bill Watts fired him, when Duck W pushed him aside, Heyman didn't give up. He made a choice that would change everything. Stern Championship Wrestling was a dying promotion in Philadelphia. Small venue, tiny crowds, no money, no future. And Paul Heyman saw potential where nobody else did. When he took over XW in the early 90s, he didn't have money. He had vision. And vision, it turns out, is more powerful than capital. XW became the proving ground for everything Heyman believed wrestling could be. It was dangerous. It was unpredictable. It felt real because people were actually getting hurt. The wrestlers worked for bounce checks, but they believed in what Heyman was building. For the first time, Heyman was in control, and he was going to prove everyone wrong. But here's where the story gets darker. Success requires sacrifice. And Heyman was about to sacrifice more than just his own career. Because what happened next, the conflicts, the broken promises, the friendships destroyed, they didn't come out of nowhere. They came from the pressure of trying to keep XW alive when the entire industry was against him. And that pressure, it transformed Paul Heyman into something else entirely. Let's start with the darkest story. Tommy Dreamer was the heart of XW. Not the best wrestler, not the biggest star, but the most loyal. He turned down a $750,000 per year deal from Duck W to stay with Paul Heyman. He wrestled for checks that didn't clear. He sacrificed his financial future for a dream. And Paul Heyman repaid that loyalty with lies. When XW started failing financially, and it was failing, losing hundreds of thousands of dollars, Heyman lied to the roster. He told them WWE was coming to save them. He promised stability. He promised survival. Tommy Dreamer believed every word. The truth was darker. XW was collapsing. There was no investor coming. There were no guarantees. Heyman had gambled everything and lost. And Tommy Dreamer, who had given up $250,000 a year, lost everything with him. When XW folded in 2001, Tommy Dreamer was financially ruined. Worse, he was psychologically destroyed. He fell into severe depression. He felt betrayed, abandoned, used. And here's where this story becomes real instead of wrestling drama. Tommy Dreamer later revealed that he planned to murder Paul Heyman. Not metaphorically, actually. He bought a ticket to WrestleMania 17. He planned to walk to the commentary table where Heyman was sitting for WWF. He was going to shoot him in the head in front of thousands of people on live pay-per-view. And then he was going to kill himself. This is not storyline. This is not wrestling drama. This is the psychological aftermath of betrayal so complete, so devastating, that a man considered his own death as preferable to living with the pain Heyman caused. Dreamer has spoken publicly about this. He's acknowledged the psychological trauma. And here's where the perspective shifts. Paul Heyman has never publicly apologized to Tommy Dreamer specifically, never acknowledged the damage. The question you have to ask yourself is, does that make Heyman a monster? Or does it make him a man so focused on survival that he couldn't afford to acknowledge the human cost? Now, let's go back to 1991. Paul Heyman is working for Duck W under Bill Watts, a legendary old-school wrestling booker. Watts is tough, traditional, unbending. Heyman is young, ambitious, full of radical ideas. They clash immediately. The details of their conflict aren't fully public, but what is public is this. Paul Heyman filed a lawsuit against Duck W alleging wrongful termination and ethnic discrimination. According to the lawsuit, Bill Watts created a hostile work environment filled with anti-Semitic jokes and harassment. The case was settled out of court. The settlement was substantial enough that Heyman used the money to take over Eastern Championship Wrestling and transform it into ECW. This is the moment that changes everything. This is where the mythology begins. Without the Duck W settlement, there is no ECW. Without ECW, Paul Heyman remains a fired manager from a failed wrestling company. Instead, he becomes a legend. But here's the complication. We don't know the full truth. The settlement has an NDA. Heyman can't discuss the details. So the question becomes, was Watts genuinely discriminatory, or did Heyman find a legal vulnerability and exploit it to escape? A bad situation? Was Heyman a victim of discrimination? Or was he brilliant enough to weaponize a situation to his advantage? The answer might be both. This is the real story people don't understand about Paul Heyman. He saw an opportunity in a crisis. Whether he was right or wrong about the discrimination, he played it perfectly. He turned the worst situation of his early career into his greatest opportunity. That's not villainy. That's survival instinct. Here's what nobody talks about when they judge Paul Heyman. ECW was doomed from the start. Not because of Heyman's management. Because the wrestling industry itself couldn't tolerate what ECW represented. ECW was promoting hardcore wrestling when the industry was shifting toward family entertainment. Heyman was booking extreme violence when sponsors wanted mainstream appeal. He was telling underground stories when the market demanded superstar spectacle. Every conflict Heyman had with his wrestlers, with his competitors, with himself came from the same source. He was trying to keep a revolutionary company alive in an industry designed to crush it. In a 2019 interview with Wrestling Inc., Paul Heyman finally explained his philosophy. He said, and this is important, you cannot achieve success without accepting losses. Sometimes those losses are financial, sometimes they're personal. But if you're not willing to sacrifice, you're not willing to win. That's not a confession of villainy. That's a justification of ruthlessness. And the wrestling industry demanded ruthlessness. Everyone from Vince McMahon to Tony Khan has sacrificed people for business success. Heyman just did it more visibly, more brutally, more honestly. After ECW died, Paul Heyman proved he could work at the highest level of WWE. He managed Brock Lesnar to legendary status. He cut promos that defined entire eras. He became an executive. He became what everyone said he could never be, success in a system he once fought against. Here's the twist that changes everything. Every wrestler Heyman supposedly failed to elevate: Cesaro, Curtis Axel, Ryback, they all became bigger stars after working with him. Cesaro is now one of AEW's biggest attractions. Ryback became a successful podcaster and entrepreneur. They didn't fail because of Heyman. They failed because the system WWE created didn't support them. Heyman gets blamed for failures that were systematic, structural, industry-wide problems, not personal cruelty. Paul Heyman's legacy isn't just about the conflicts and betrayals. It's about revolutionizing professional wrestling. AEW created the blueprint that WWE would copy during its most profitable era. The Attitude Era? That was Heyman's extreme vision, finally accepted by mainstream wrestling. The wrestlers who suffered under Heyman: Tommy Dreamer, The Sandman, Mike Awesome, they all contributed to a product that changed wrestling forever. They were part of something bigger than their individual pain, even if they didn't know it at the time. Today, professional wrestling looks completely different because of Paul Heyman's influence. The storytelling, the psychology, the willingness to blur reality and fiction, the anti-hero narratives, all of it traces back to AEW. All of it traces back to a man who was willing to be hated for his vision. And here's the modern connection. Just last month, CM Punk, the wrestler Heyman fought for control over at WWE, returned to WWE as Paul Heyman's client. After all these years, after all the conflict, they're together again. And that partnership is producing some of the best storytelling in wrestling right now. Unlike today's wrestlers who have guaranteed contracts and union protections, Heyman's generation had nothing. They worked for bounce checks in front of 200 people, not knowing if they'd ever reach millions. The difference between Heyman's era and now is night and day. Tommy Dreamer eventually recovered. He's successful now. He's spoken about making peace with what happened. And in recent years, he's actually defended Heyman, acknowledging that the man was doing his best in an impossible situation. That's not forgiveness, exactly. It's understanding. Paul Heyman is 58 years old now. He's not the young revolutionary anymore. He's a corporate executive. He sits in WWE board meetings. He's part of the system. And maybe that's the ultimate irony. The man who fought the establishment became the establishment. But that's what wrestling demanded. That's what success required. If you love this deep dive into Paul Heyman's untold story, not just the conflicts, but the reasons behind them, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Ring Legends is dedicated to uncovering the complexity of wrestling's greatest figures, the people who shaped the industry in ways both dark and beautiful. Who should we cover next? Drop your pick in the comments below. Should we explore Vince McMahon's conflicts, Tony Khan's ruthlessness, the system that creates these monsters? Let me know. Next week, we're diving into Tommy Dreamer's full story from AEW loyalist to WWE superstar to making peace with his past. You won't want to miss it because his journey is the redemption arc that Paul Heyman's wasn't. This channel is growing because fans like you understand that wrestling isn't just entertainment. It's a window into human nature, into ambition, into the cost of revolution. Let's keep uncovering these stories together. Let's keep asking the hard questions.